Hey, lovely crafters. Happy month of October. Welcome to my page. My name is Coco. If you've seen my videos on TikTok, you've seen me make a couple of these mushroom hats now, and every time I wear one, I get a lot of questions, so I wanted to come out and make a tutorial for you guys. This design is lightweight, it's comfortable, it doesn't require any special skills, and it also lights up. So let's get into it. For this design, you're going to need about 1.5 yards of Eva foam. The sheet I decided to use is a 10mm foam, but you could probably use as thick as 16mm. I just wouldn't go much thinner than 10. What I'm doing here is cutting out 8 pieces that will then be glued together to make the dome of the cap. I actually just cut this template out of scrap fabric that I had with no idea of whether or not it was going to work, and I just got really lucky. But if you're not comfortable eyeing things and you want to be exact, I suggest getting a cheap template off of Etsy. I should mention I'm using a bandsaw to do this cutting. You absolutely do not need a bandsaw. You can use scissors to cut Eva foam. It's incredibly soft. You can also use a turkey carver. However, I just found this to be really easy and smooth, so this is the route I took. At this point, I didn't know if my pattern was even going to work, so I decided to tape the pieces together with painter's tape and just make sure that the shape was going to be mushroomy enough. Does anyone do this when they're crafting with their tape too? I also do this when I'm wrapping presents, and I cannot tell you how many times I have found little pieces of tape all over my sweaters, like months later. Speaking of sweaters, and I'm not sponsored, obviously, with my 300 followers, who I love and I'm very grateful for, but if I do get sponsored, it should be by Snuggie because this is my unofficial craft uniform. Et voila! The pattern actually works, hey! Okay, so now that you have your pieces, you can see here how they don't line up perfectly because the edge is a 90-degree angle. It needs to be more of like a 75-degree angle in order to flush, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut that off. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, but the most important part is you want to make sure you're not cutting the actual shape of the piece, just the angle. Now with that angle cut, you can see how these pieces really come together and it's a lot more smooth of a fit. Once you have all of your pieces cut at an angle, you're just going to take some regular hot glue and start gluing all of those pieces together. The shape was good, but I wasn't thrilled about how noticeable the seams are, so I decided to sand them down. I've since learned that I could have also used a heat gun to kind of manipulate the foam and have a more rounded shape, but I didn't know that at the time, and I'm still learning, so I don't know. Let's learn together. Anyway, this is an incredibly important step. If you're going to be sanding with foam or plastic of any kind, definitely use a mask, if you can, a full face mask. I decided to use a belt sander for speed, but you can also just use any kind of sanding paper that you have at home for this step. And after about 30 minutes, you can really start to see the shape coming together. Once you're happy with the shape of the cap, you can use your cap as a template to cut out the base that the gills are going to go on. As you can see, it was a little sloppy, so I'm just going through and cleaning it up and making sure that it's an actual circle. And because there's no exact way to do this, try to make sure that your circle's a little bit larger than you think that you're going to need it. You can always cut it down smaller if you end up needing to. And here I am drawing out the space where my head is going to go. Again, you're going to want to try to cut conservatively in case you need to make adjustments after you cut it. You can always make the hole bigger and you can't make the hole smaller. I would go ahead and pop this in the cap as well as wear it on your head for a second to make sure it fits prior to decorating it. So I wasn't planning on filming anything else because it's like 10 o'clock and I just got back from a walk with the girls. And I filmed like 9 hours of another project that I'm working on. But I'm walking through my sewing room and the exact same color blue that I need for the mushroom hat is in my sewing machine. So I'm planning on spending the next couple minutes just covering this with the fabric and
banging that out before I call it a night.
Now, I am positive that there's a better way to do this, but the fabric that I'm working with is extremely stretchy, so I just kind of loosely eyed a pattern. I decided to cut out 3 different pieces and just kind of hope for the best, and surprisingly, it worked out. You actually don't have to cut apart your fabric at all. You can just drape a piece of fabric over the top of your cap, especially if it's stretchy, and you can just ruche it around the edges of the cap where it meets the flat part that the gills are going to be on. I decided I didn't want any fabric gathering at the bottom because I wasn't sure how I was going to put on the spots at this point, so this is how I did it. The blue overlay fabric that I'm using is slightly see-through, and I wasn't happy with how it was looking over white, so I decided to use this light blue fabric that I had from another project left over and use that as what I was going to put underneath the stretchy burnout fabric. Once I made sure that it was going to fit over the cap properly, I just used hot glue to glue it in place. And if you are using stretchy fabric, just make sure that you're not stretching it too tight in one direction, or it has the potential to manipulate the shape of the cap. This is my favorite part. So I decided to get all fancy and try to record in cinematic for you guys, and it just focused on the back of my head the whole time. But I'm still learning. It's a new channel. Be patient with me, you guys. After you're done gluing all of the edges down, you're just going to come through and cut off that excess material. And if you're doing 2 layers of fabric like I am, you're just going to recreate that same process that you did with the first with the second layer. So this is what I'm using for the gills. It's just called foam sheets. I think that if you've been to a Michael's or Joann's, you've probably seen these in the shelves. It's just a thin foam sheet. My advice is to buy a pack of 20 like I did, because you're going to use a lot of these. You're going to cut these into roughly 1-inch strips. It doesn't really matter that they're exactly 1-inch strips because you won't be able to tell once they're actually glued on, but just roughly about the same width. In this design, we're going to hide the lights behind these little glass drops. You can find these in Michael's and Joann's by the floral department, but you can also find these online. I think these are supposed to be decorations in vases, but today we're going to use them to hide the lighting. Because I base the design of the gills around the dewdrops, I'm going to go ahead and put these on first. And these holes are where the lights are going to come through behind them. Now that we know where our dewdrops are going to be, we're just going to take our strips and glue them to the base. I think the gills are definitely the most time-consuming part of this whole design, but also the most fun and kind of interesting part. I just think this is where the hat really starts coming together in a more artistic and pretty way, instead of just structural. But my advice to you is to find a good audiobook or a couple movies that you want to watch, because this can take a better part of the day, or in my case, several days, because this isn't my full-time job yet. And you don't have to be too particular, because once all of the gills are on there, it really does all blend together and just looks so beautiful. You won't see any of the imperfections. It is a new day. In fact, it is my birthday. And I do have plans today, but I have to get this done because Ren Fair is in 2 days. So I want to get this off my plate. And I love crafting, so I would love to spend the first hour or 2 of my birthday having a cup of coffee and finishing my hat and feeling good about that. So here we go. Although this glass is slightly textured, I can still see some of the wiring from the lights, So I'm going to use a little bit of resin and glitter to kind of camouflage it some more. Also, if you don't have resin, you can use clear nail polish for this step. I should mention that if you're going to be using resin, you should be wearing a vapor mask and wearing gloves. I'm not wearing gloves in this video because at the time of this filming, I did not know how toxic resin is. Thankfully, I don't touch resin and didn't get any in my skin, but you definitely want to be wearing gloves and using a vapor mask if you're going to be working with resin. But basically, I just used the resin to cover the glass, and I just covered it with 2 different types of glitter. This way the light will come through the glitter and look really pretty and whimsical, but it won't show any of the wiring. I decided to use UV resin to speed up the process, but if you only have regular resin, that's fine too. And then I just used E600 to glue the dewdrops to cover the holes. Ah, it's so cute. All right, now that that's done, I just have to do these spots that go on the top of the mushroom. For the spots on the outside of the cap, I used leftover foam to create this rough base. I made them all different sizes, but honestly, I probably could have made the sizes more dramatic because you can't really tell when I put them all on the outside of the cap. I'm covering mine with 2 layers of fabric, including a lace that's going to disguise any of this rough texture that you can see in the edges. If you are not doing that, you might want to go through and sand the edges to make them a little bit softer. Alternatively, if you have foam clay, you can just make some from scratch out of clay and shape them to whatever you'd like. Because I'm putting lace on these, I still have to put a underlayer so that you can't see the foam, so I'm using the same fabric that I used underneath the velvet burnout fabric on the cap. But if you end up using clay foam for this step, you can actually get white foam and just add a couple drops of food coloring to match whatever color you're going for. And now I'm just repeating the same thing with this lace. I hope it doesn't look too matchy-matchy, but this is the same lace that I'm using in the bottom of my skirt as well. So hopefully it ties it all together and it doesn't look too, I don't know, cartoony. Okay, so honestly, something at this point was looking off to me. It was just too plain or something, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I thought I would feel differently once all the spots were on, but I didn't, and I think I just needed to add one more thing to it. Okay, Ren Fair is tomorrow. This isn't done, my dress isn't done, but Ren Fair is tomorrow. Upon seeing this with these spots on it, I think I actually want to add some color around the rim of it, like an ombre effect, maybe a little bit darker around here. So unfortunately I did not think about that before I put the spots on, but I'm going to tape around the spots and I'm going to hit it with a quick spray paint and just kind of see if I can't get this done in about an hour. Okay, would I have been able to skip this step if I had an airbrush? Yes. Do I own an airbrush machine? No. I am on the verge of buying one though because I don't really care for spray paint. But ultimately it got the job done and I do like the darker blue. I think it really improved the overall look. I wanted to add lights without adding any additional weight with a battery pack, so I decided just to use some fairy lights. They ended up being really easy to glue down, and for how small they are, they're actually really bright. I think the fairy lights that I used are a 10-foot string, and I just looped the wire around my finger until about 3 of the lights were in the loop. And then I just used hot glue to glue that loop inside the opening behind the dewdrop. Since I made my loops based on how many lights were in it and not length, there was some extra wire in between the loops, so I just glued those down. I love the fairy lights, they add just the perfect amount of light behind the dewdrops. Now that that's done, the gills are ready to be glued into the cap. And there you have it, a lightweight, light-up mushroom hat. This was me opening day at the New York Tuxedo Park Renaissance Fair. And shout out to my beautiful mother who's here helping me with my spiderweb fairy wings. If you made it this far in the video, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. To those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Coco. I'm an artist and a crafter, and I started this channel to share some things that I make, the events that I go to. So if this type of video interests you and you want to support a new YouTuber, please consider liking this video and following my channel. I'm currently editing a tutorial for my spiderweb fairy wings you see here, and another video about being in the New York Halloween parade, as well as the costume contest at Webster Hall afterwards. So if you'd like to watch those videos, hit subscribe and turn on your notifications, and thank you so much again for watching. Happy crafting!